Hello everyone. Today I am RISHABH, Assistant Professor in St. Andrews Institute of Technology and Management, taking the 10th lecture of Automobile Department Mechanical Engineering Semester 6th. Today in this lecture we will learn about rear axle drive, Hotchkiss drive, torque tube drive, radius rods, and propeller shaft. Let's discuss with the Hotchkiss drive. Hotchkiss drive is a type of drive which is commonly used on passenger cars and heavy commercial vehicles. As you see in the figure, two rear leaf springs which are longitudinally mounted and are connected to the frame by fixed pivot at the front and swing cycle at the rear. A universal joint is mounted at each end of the propeller shaft with provision for accommodating change in shaft length due to deflection of the spring. This drive therefore incorporates an open propeller shaft with two universal joint and a joint slip joint. Shaft drive consists of drive shaft called propeller shaft extended from the transmission in front of differential in rear. The differentiating characteristic of Hotchkiss drive is fact that the axle housing is firmly attached to the leaf springs to transfer the axle torque through the car body. It uses universal joint at both ends of the drive shaft which is not enclosed. The use of two universal joints properly faced and with parallel alignment of the drive and driven shaft, which allows the use of simple cross type universal. In contrast, a torque tube arrangement uses only a single universal at end of the transmission tail shaft. Typically a constant velocity joint or a CV joint, the axle housing is held fast by the torque tube which anchors the differential housing of the transmission. In Hotchkiss drive, slip splines and plug type eliminate thrust transmitting back up the drive shaft from the axle, allowing simple rear axle position using parallel leaf springs. In the torque tube type, this thrust is taken by the torque tube to the transmission and hence to the transmission and the motor mounted on the frame. While torque tube type, when combined with rear oil springs, requires additional locating element such as pen-hard rod. This is not needed with torque tube or leaf spring combination. Some Hotchkiss drive shafts are made in two pieces with another universal joint in the center for greater flexibility, typically in trucks and specialty in vehicles built on fire trucks frame. Some installations use rubber mount to isolate noise and vibration. The design of the main frame of power transmission for most of the cars is from 1920s through the 1970s. As of 2016, it remains common in pickup trucks and sports utility vehicle. Just too important as power transmission is braking, in power transmission the torque applied to the wheel is countered by the equal and opposite reaction in the axle housing. But in braking, the torque of braking the wheel is equal but same in direction. In rear wheel drive, the braking applied by the rear brakes is just as important as the power transmission, and the problem is the same and is involved in the same manner. Firmly anchored the axle housing to the leaf spring transfer both direction of torque to the car. This is the Hotchkiss drive. Next, we will learn about the torque tube drive. In this figure, you can see the torque tube type and the torque reaction. We have a ball joint, torque tube, swing saggle, and a propeller shaft. Of that, these are the components of torque tube type. The torque tube type is a drive system which is generally used in passenger as well as the heavy vehicles. It has been illustrated in the figure using the laminated springs which are connected to the frame by swinging cycle at each end. A tubular member called torque tube encloses the propeller shaft and is bolted rigidly to the axle casing. The torque tube is positioned at the front by the ball and socket joint, which is located at the near of the gearbox and cross member of the frame. A small diameter propeller shaft is installed inside the torque tube and supplied to the driver driven pinion. A universal joint is installed in center of the ball joint to allow the angular deflection to the drive. A torque tube system is a power transmission and braking technology that involves a stationary housing around the drive shaft, often used in automobiles with a front engine and rear drives and rear brakes. The torque tube consists of large diameter stationary housing between the transmission and rear end that fully enclose a rotating tubular steel or small diameter solid drive shaft that transmits the power of the engine to the regular or limiting slip differential. The purpose of torque tube is to hold the rear end in place during acceleration and braking. Otherwise, the axle housing would suffer axle rap such that the front of the differential would lift up excessively during acceleration and sink down during braking. Its use is not as widespread in modern automobiles as is the Hotchkiss drive, which hold the rear end in place and prevent it from flipping up and down during acceleration and braking by anchoring the axle housing to the leaf spring using spring pinches. Now let's discuss with the construction of torque tube drive. The torque that is referred to in the name of is not the drive shaft along the axis of the car, but the applied to the wheels. The engineering problem that the torque tube solved is how to get the traction forces generated by the wheels to the car frame. The torque moving the wheel and axle in the forward direction is met with an equal and opposite reaction to the axle housing and differential, making the differential want to spin in reverse direction in the same way that the cyclist pops a wheelie, lifting the bicycle in the air in opposite direction from the turn of the wheel. The essential problem is how to keep differential from rotating during acceleration and braking. The torque tube solves the problem by coupling the differential housing to the transmitting housing and therefore propels the car forward by pushing on the engine and then through the engine mount to the car frame, with the reverse happening during braking. In contrast, the Hotchkiss drive transmit the traction forces to the car frame using suspension component such as leaf spring and trailing arms. A type of ball and socket joint called a torque ball, which is used at the end of torque tube to allow relative motion, between the axle and transmission due to suspension travel. Later, American Motors Ramble model used a flange and cushion mount in place of ball and socket. Since the torque tube does not constrain the car's body to the axle in the lateral direction, a pen-hard rod is often used for this purpose. The combination of pen-hard rod and the torque tube always the easy implementation of soft coil spring in the rear to give good ride quality. Brick used leaf spring so as the pen-hard rod was not used. Through the torque tube allow a cantilever spring suspension, which gives a softer ride than center mount axle on the leaf spring, as required by the Hotchkiss step up. In addition of transmitting traction forces, the torque tube is allowed and contain the rotating drive shafts. Inside the torque hollow torque ball is the universal joint of driven shaft that allow relative motion between two ends of the drive shaft. In most applications, the drive shaft uses a single universal joint, which has a disadvantage that it causes speed fluctuation in drive shafts when the shaft is not at straight position. The Hotchkiss drive uses two universal joint, which has effect of cancelling the speed fluctuation and gives a constant speed even when the shaft is no longer straight. The torque tube design is typically heavier and securely ties the regular rear end together, thus providing for a rigid rear end and assuring good alignment under all conditions. However, because of the greater sprung weight of torque tube and radius rods, there may be little hopping around of the rear end and where cornering fast and the washboard rods. If we discuss about the application and the implementation and the torque tube available in the market, that will be the example of torque tube where American cars of Ford brand up to through 1948 including over 19 lakh models. Ford uses the less expensive transverse springs that could not take forward thrust. For many those years, the Chevrolet used the torque tubes while BTECH used the starting in 1906. The torque tube was also allowed beginning in 1938 to use coil spring of the softer ride. The traditional leaf spring, which can be used a Hotchkiss drive, but coil spring cannot. After the merge of Nash and Hudson in 1954, American Motor Corporation continued to use coil spring and torque tube rear suspension design on their large size cars. To continue limiting production of Avanti switches, a new chassis in 1986 that utilized a torque tube along with an independent rear suspension. Now the Mercedes SLS has a torque tube but only to align the transaxle with the engine. Let's move to our next topic, that is radius rod. The radius rod extended to control the wheel motion in the longitudinal direction. The link is connected to end of the rear wheel carriage on axle and on the other to the chassis of the vehicle. Radius rods are also sometimes used as in aircrafts with fixed undercarriages. Radius rods in aircraft must be regularly inspected because their failure will cause understrain Chevrolet in the wheels. Radius rods are typically mounted ahead to the wheel In that position, they resist drive under braking force and wheel hop under acceleration. Radius rods are customizably made as stamped steel and aluminum for lightness, as they are the part of the vehicle sprung weight. Improved in composite material technology make possible plastic suspension link, although they are still uncommon. Other suspension components can be made to act as radius rods under certain conditions. A car suspension isn't complete without the radius rod. This component contains and maintains the wheel's motion in one direction. To prevent shivering and swaying, it reduces the impact of sudden braking and sudden speeding up of the car so you don't get thrown off out the windshield. The radius rod or arm simply cannot fail and else serious injuries await the car driver. If this part is causing some real problem in your driving, you have to replace it immediately. You don't have to worry because the process is simple and easy. However, you need to find replacement radius rod first before the installation job. To help you to find the radius arm for your car, you have to follow some practical tips that how and which type of radius rod in your car need to be replaced. Second, choose a radius rod that are made up of high grade of material. And third and the main part is the buy a radius rod only from the trusted sellers. Otherwise you will feel that you have a problem with your suspension system and the experience of the driving will get reduced, and even the chances of accidents may increase due to the unauthenticity of the dealer and the part as well. Let's of today's last topic, that is propeller shaft. This is the main component of the drive line which transfer the motion from transmission box to the rear wheel axles or directly to the differential. This is very common and important component of the rear wheel axle drive. The propeller shaft is a shaft which transfers the power developed in the engine to the wheels with the help of gearbox. It transmits a universe of universal joints which allow the propeller shaft to move linearly when the wheel of the vehicle run over an uneven surface. A drive shaft or a propeller shaft is a mechanical component for transmitting torque and rotation, usually used to connect other component to the drivetrain that cannot be connected directly because of distance or the need to allow for relative movement between them. As torque carrier, drive shafts are subjected to torsion and shear stress equivalent to the distance between the input torque and the load. They must therefore be strong enough to bear the stress while avoiding too much additional weight as that would increase their inertia. To allow for variation in the alignment and distance between the driving and driven component, drive shaft frequently incorporate from one universal joint, jaw coupling and rack joints, and sometimes a spline and prismatic joints. Today we have discussed about rear axle drives which have the two parts, Hotchkiss drive, torque tube type. Then we have studied radius rods and the main component of the drivetrain, that is propeller shaft. Today we are just studies the main component of power transmission, and I would like to thank all the viewers and the students which are watching this video, and stay tuned for our next lecture, that will be the next lecture 11, and you will get and got your knowledge enhanced by these lectures. Thank you.